Good evening and welcome to the Hugh Hatrick Show. And tonight we have a very special guest, and he's been on once before, so he's come back to upgrade us to see exactly what he's been up to. It is, of course, the one and only Paul Walsh. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Hugh. Good evening, all. How you doing today, Hugh? I see the massive grin on your face. You having a good day by the looks of things?
Yes. Oh, I've had a great day. Yes, lots of fun and exciting things going on. But also happier to see you here tonight and to find out how things are going. It's been about 2.5 years, I think, since the last time. I think it was about 2022, March of 2022, when we last had a good chat. And things have really taken off for you. But yeah, so it'd be great to see exactly how things are going and where you are now. But for people who are just joining us and maybe perhaps haven't seen you before, tell us, how did you get started in commentary and kind of like your sim racing career? How did all that start?
All right, so let's wind back the clock a little bit for those who perhaps didn't catch the first time I was on the Hugh Hatrick show. So to introduce myself, so my name is Paul Walsh for everyone. I picked up sim racing as an entity over the COVID-19 pandemic, as I'm sure many of us did. Big motorsport fan personally before I opted to jump into the sim racing world, but I never really investigated it. And what inspired me to get into sim racing was watching a number of YouTube videos from Key25 on Gran Turismo Sport. But one day, sat down with some friends as they were competing in just a little friends league, and I decided to have a go at commentating over some of the racing, because the commentary that was provided as part of the sort of little broadcast, my friends weren't too keen on. So they were sort of, hey, you know what, Paul, if you think you can do better, give it a try. That happened, and then they said, well, actually, that sounded pretty good. You should volunteer for some other small leagues and sort of provide commentary. Did that. One thing led to another. Then I got picked up as part of covering a Club 100 esports event. I mean, goodness me, we're going back some now. That was about 2 years ago. Oh, no, so not 2 years ago, more than that. That was 4 years ago. And all this being volunteering, just volunteering my time for a laugh and just have a bit of fun. And one of my good friends now, didn't know him at the time, but a friend of mine now, Mark Sykes from Next Gen Racing. I'll get in the brand in there, if you will. Apologies for the product placement. But Mark Sykes, one of the senior admins for Next Gen Racing, because their team was racing a part of it, went, you know what? You sound really good on commentary. Would you mind having a go at commentating some racing on PC? So they gave me a trial with a one-off event on Assetto Corsa Competizione. They absolutely loved what I did there, and a lot of people who took part in the one-off event loved it. And they said, okay, we'd like you to come back on a regular basis. We'll pay you for either the content, or we'll just pay you a regular rate in order to cover our Assetto Corsa Competizione leagues on PC. And that is where it all started, with regards to sort of going from volunteering to cover leagues on Gran Turismo Sport, then going on to PC and starting to be paid as a hobby to provide sim racing commentary. So then we wind forward to when I first caught up with yourself. So I've been doing it for a number of years at that point. So it would have been 2.5 years effectively at that time, and worked with a number of communities, Next Gen being one of my main ones, UK Sim Racing being another one. And I can't say enough how both communities have been absolutely fantastic in introducing me to people, and also introducing me to some of the finest esports drivers out there, the likes of, say, Luke Whitehead, or alternatively George Boothby, just to name two in the Assetto Corsa Competizione space, and in the iRacing space, for example, James Armstrong from Brabham Esports. But I also worked with a number of communities outside of them, including some North American continent-based communities, such as the Middle of the Pack Racing League, the Alpha Touring Challenge. And we discovered ways that if I can't provide live commentary, because some of you may be going, well, if it's American and you're UK-based, how do you work out the time zone? We worked out this thing, particularly on iRacing, where I provide post-round commentaries, or we just take the entire footage of all the race and I just commentate over it afterwards. And I absolutely love that. So we discovered that format. And from taking it from there, it's just continued to go and go. But the last time I was on, one of my aims was to go, okay, well, I can clearly do a decent job, it would seem, being a little bit modest here, a decent job in the sim racing space with commentary, but can I potentially transition into real life commentary? And well, a year after we caught up about that, I had the opportunity to get my debut in real life commentary up at the Snetterton circuit in the United Kingdom, so in the county of, I want to say, Norfolk, if I know my counties correctly. I might be wrong on that. But I had the chance to work with Live Sport now, an absolutely brilliant company I can strongly recommend if you're into a whole medley of sport, and motorsport through to football, netball, etc., even golf. They cover a whole variety of sports. And I got to work with, I believe, their founder, Ian Waterhouse, and a number of his colleagues in providing coverage for what was a event dedicated to the MG Owners Car Club, or the MGCC as it was known, in 2023. I believe it's dissolved or changed ownership since then, but I'm not quite sure of the politics. But I got to be behind the camera, presenting, interviewing drivers, commentating on the racing. And they absolutely loved it. The drivers and the organisers loved it. And then this year, I've had 3 subsequent opportunities to be back behind the real life microphone for the classic and modern motorsport car Club Southern. That was up at Mallory Park in May. And then subsequently, I got to cover an entire round of the British Truck Racing Championship, or the official Truck Racing Championship of the United Kingdom, in the commentary booth alongside the official voice of truck racing. His name is Pointy, or that's his stage name. I don't think anybody knows his real name. Pointy the Plumber, he calls himself. An absolute joy to be behind. And then most recently, of course, my commentary came to Donington Park. In fact, both were at Donington Park, the trucks, and more recently, where I was covering a Caterham Festival weekend, so the entire Caterham motorsport ladder in the United Kingdom, having all of its season finales at Donington Park National, and working alongside an absolutely fantastic team there. And that's been where I am now. And well, going into 2025, I've been told, you know what, keep your weekends free. There's plenty more to potentially come, and I can't wait to see what happens. And all this because I can see a number of questions there in the chat as we go. All this being a hobby, I should emphasize. And if my employer is currently watching this, I have to say hobby, because I'm not allowed to take a second job alongside my first job, because I still do work in IT for a transport company. And trying to balance the books on that one, it's crazy. But you know what? I found a way to do it, and absolutely loving it every step of the way. And to have my dream come true and be able to come back and say this, well, I'm absolutely proud of it. And I hope perhaps it gives some inspiration to those who are dipping their toes into commentary. And I believe yourself, Hugh, you've had a chance at it quite recently. They may look at me and go, you know what? If he can make it into the real life, then I can do that too one day. And it encourages people to realize the transition from sim to real, it takes time, and we can break that down. But it is possible. And I'm following the footsteps of a number of other individuals who I look up to, including the likes of Jack Oliphant, who is one of the commentators and presenters for Touring Car Racing UK, or TCR UK. And I have the pleasure to work alongside him in a less official role, but he's an absolute pleasure. And he's just one of the shining examples out there that I hope to be able to replicate, if not carve my own path alongside.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Because I think the way that sim racing has worked so well and grown over the last few years, I think it has really helped motorsport fans get back into motorsport. Because it does take a bit of money, even just as a spectator, isn't it, to kind of go to some of these big real events. So what's been really good has been able to do the ACC races, or even Gran Turismo races, whatever it might be, whether it be console or PC. It's gotten people a lot more involved, and then as a result, the communities grow, and then they all say, right, we'll go and we'll all meet up at Donington or at Brands Hatch, and so it's great to kind of see a resurgence of people coming back to motorsport. And a lot of it comes because, well, we can now actually have a go, whether we're driving or commentating. It gives us the chance to get in on the action and kind of feel a bit more involved. So what was it like when you turned up at Donington, which is a fantastic track? I mean, the history of Donington is incredible. Did you find yourself kind of touching the tarmac a little bit, or kind of like, or when you come into the pits and you see how many things, there was the perfect lap the lap of the gods by Senna in '93. What was it like meeting the drivers on the grid and interviewing them? Was that quite fun?
Oh, absolutely brilliant. I mean, at Donington Park, a circuit which I've had the pleasure of taking my own car around in the past as well, as part of a track day experience. And I must say, it is a venerable piece of tarmac, which I can recommend anybody. If you get the experience to drive around or ride in a car that's been driven quickly around Donington Park, you'll absolutely love it, I promise you. But it feels surreal to think that, I mean, I was born in 1993, but my dad used to record all the Formula One Grand Prix on VHS tapes. I used to watch them back as I was growing up with massive Formula One fans. To think to myself, you know what? Okay, it's not Formula One. I'm not Murray Walker or James Hunt, may he rest in peace. But I'm not one of those individuals. But at the same time, to actually be there and sat in a commentary booth, and the thumbnail, the image of me on the thumbnail is me in one of the commentary booths at Donington Park for the British Truck Racing Championship. And to think to myself, I'm here and I'm now presenting the commentary on the British Automobile Racing Club or the BARC's television channel on YouTube.
I
can't believe this. Could somebody pinch me? Am I dreaming? This is just absolutely brilliant. And getting the chance to speak to drivers. I mean, and whilst the interviews I did with drivers were not televised, because what I like to do when I'm just in the commentary booth, I normally get there really early in the morning to help the camera crews get things set up and whatnot, because it's a team exercise. And I like to feel as though, if we get everything set up together, we all get to go home a little bit earlier when we pack things up and whatnot. But the point being, when I get there early, I try and walk up and down the paddock, speak to as many drivers as possible with my tiny little notepad and my pen that's running out of ink, to sort of go, look, how you feeling for today? This is all for the purposes of the commentary later. So I've got some notes if throw these in. And to see them all beaming, it's sort of, wait, are you going to be presenting the broadcast later? So I'll make sure my family tune in. So it just...
that's really good, though. That's good preparation. That's proper preparation. And I think that's the thing, is that you have to have that. You've got to know, because I always think if you're in the commentary box, I mean, here, when you do it on your PC, you might have a couple of screens that you can kind of quickly see what's going on, and you should know what the cars are or who's in what car. Although sometimes when it's GT3, they look quite similar. And so how many Lamborghinis in an ACC race or all the rest of it, it's kind of, there's so many of the same thing. So trying to kind of copy it all out, or remember, make it distinct, so you know exactly what's going on. And that's what you have to do. I always remember that's what Murray Walker did. He used to have the maps put up and all the pictures. The same with Martin Brundle, and his notes as well. And he would go and talk to people in the pits. But that's a great way, and it's funny that when you do that then the family say, "Oh, we'll watch you on the screen or on the TV later on." So you're kind of building that up as well, which is good. That and if you were born in 1993, well, that's when I went to Donington to the Jim Russell Racing Centre. I think it was a Jim Russell Racing Drivers kind of instructors club, and I got it for my 18th birthday. And I drove a Vauxhall Lotus, a go-kart, a Vauxhall Astra. I think it was a GTE. And we had, it was one of these ones, they had the water on the bonnet, and you had to try and keep the water in and that, so which didn't really work very well. And it was, and that was great fun. And I remember carving some poor driver up in the go-karts and sent him off into the wall. They had built this kind of go-kart track just with those little bollards, and he came through to overtake, and I was watching far too many Senna videos, and I thought, I'll cut him off, and so and he went off into the wall, and that was that. So I had my fun. But and I also remember at that time I was a lot thinner, and they said to me, they had Vauxhall Lotuses and then Formula Vauxhall, and they looked at the people who were all waiting to have a go, and they said, "You're just thin enough, you can go in a Vauxhall Lotus." But so that's how we were able to get in and have a go. I mean, we did it on the loop at the Donington loop at the back. But I think that it's the fun of motorsport as well, isn't it? Because we like the competition, and everyone's kind of, if when you've got enthusiasts for motorsport, they're good folk to get on with, aren't they? You find there's a great camaraderie, and that's the thing. What's been your kind of your most daunting kind of commentary that you've had to do?
Oh, goodness me. Well, so you're going to love this, and I think your viewers are going to love this. So, start of this year, with regards to when the commentary season starts, I get a call to go up to Mallory Park to cover the Classic and Modern Motorsport Club event there in May. And this is going to be my second time doing real life commentary. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, is it because the volume of races on the weekend? Well, there were 20 races over the weekend, a whole variety of machines, from old Thunder saloons dating back to the 60s all the way through to early noughties machines. No, it wasn't that. It was the fact that when I asked, so how am I exactly going to be doing the commentary? And they said, well, in fact, you're going to be presenter and commentator, and you're not going to be in a booth, you're going to be a roaming presenter and commentator. Now, to break that down for those perhaps uninitiated, if you've watched Formula One on TV or any major motorsport on TV, such as IMSA and whatnot, you'll know obviously you have your presenters who normally sit in the paddock and normally bring the show in terms of intro. They might go around, do some interviews. Alternatively, they'll close out the show, or they'll act as the middleman to segue between commentary segments and individual interviews, etc. And then you have your commentators in a formal booth. Well, imagine I'm walking around the circuit for the entire weekend. We have 3 stationary cameras, and then I have a cameraman who follows me around for the entire weekend. And I've got my handheld microphone, and I've got a set of Bluetooth earphones. In fact, I've got a set of wired headphones on my phone in which I'm talking to the broadcast director. That's the setup.
Wow.
It is 3 of us providing a broadcast over the whole weekend for 20 races, and we've just got to get on with it. And I was thrown in the deep end, and I was told, right, it's your show, Paul. You do whatever you want. Obviously, the cameraman who was highly experienced, guy named Sean, absolutely brilliant guy to work with. And I am Mars bar if I ever get the chance to buy him one. But the broadcast director as well, I can't remember his name, and I do apologize for that. Absolutely fantastic. And they were sort of feeding me advice of what we could do to fill out the show. So I had to go around before we started the Saturday show, because we only covered the races. We didn't cover qualifying. Sort of going around interviewing drivers, getting those pre-recorded, so that way we could fill out the show early on, buy me some breathing room. But it was running up and down the paddock with the cameraman behind me, sort of going, right, with my notepad in front of me, we've got an interview for this round or this series of racing, but we haven't got one here, so let's quickly find someone for that. And then having to then jump to each and every one of the races. And when the races were on, it would be one of those situations whereby the race would finish, and then where we were stood on this little gazebo tower where a load of spectators are gathered. So I had to try and find a place to stand to watch the racing around me at Mallory Park, which for the uninitiated, Mallory Park is only about 1.6 miles, I want to say, the full out of the circuit. So it's tiny, and you can see most of the circuit from the center, which is where we were on this gazebo. But as soon as the race is finished, I had to run down in the paddock, cameraman behind me, whilst reading out the results off of my phone and trying to run to where Parc Fermé was to interview the drivers, and then run back up to the gazebo to cover the next race and rinse and repeat that over the entirety of the weekend. And I came out of it with no voice left after 2 days. I even got to bear witness and cover the penultimate race of the Sunday, which was a last to first challenge in terms of the driver who won it, Ollie Allen, and an incredible drive from the back of the field to take victory on the final lap, which everybody completely lost it, myself included. Wow. And that was just my my second time behind the real life microphone. I got told afterwards, well, if that's your second time behind the microphone, you've absolutely smashed it. You might want to keep yourself available going forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are they going to give you for the next one, though? You know, it was like...
If I may jump in, the funny thing is, and so again, it's one of those things, as you go to bigger productions, what you end up having is you have a presenter, then you might have some pit lane interviewers, and you have your commentators. Where I started off in the more sort of grassroots, if you will, commentary is my first ever one at Snetterton there was a team of 3 of us and a single camera. So we had to cover the entirety of the weekend on a single camera. And thankfully, Snetterton has a mound at the Agostini hairpin at turn number 4, where you can look over 90% of the circuit. So we could cover most things and get things done from there. So to do that and then do what I did at Mallory Park as presenter and also commentator, and then to go into the commentary booth at Donington Park for subsequently the BTRC plus also the catering weekend, I've technically done it in reverse in terms of a lot of people try to come into commentary by just being behind the microphone. They don't want to be perhaps behind the camera or the TV screen, if you will. So that's something I was pointed out to afterwards. A lot of people have come up the opposite way to me in terms of they start in the booth, then get behind the TV camera, whereas I've got TV camera, then into the booth, and never mind coming back out of it again.
Yeah. All right, it's quite a thing, isn't it? Because you don't realize just how much is required to get it right. I always like, when you go into the F1, and normally I log in about 5 minutes before it starts because I can't stand all some of the. I used to like the grid walk. I always used to like Martin Brundle's grid walk, but then you got so many adverts and everything else. So I tend just to you pop in at like about 1:53 if it starts at 2:00, and then you get the music that starts, and then what's his name? Oh, it's not. It was Martin Brundle and David Croft. and David Croft is always quite good at bringing, getting everyone up to date with what's been happening, and then Brundle comes in with his tone. But I think what's quite reasonable there with the two of those commentators, that they are, that they've got a good experience, good history, and I think they definitely mean what they say, or in terms of, you can tell that it's a very real story and a real engagement that they're trying to create. I think what annoys me slightly now, I hopefully I won't hither any potential career opportunities for you, but when you see the F1 commentators, I tend to find that when it's not the Sky one, but the F1 version that you see on YouTube quite a lot, they tend to shout all the time, and as soon as the race starts, there's one chap who shouts all the time, and you never, and you kind of think, yes, it's exciting and things are happening, but it just seems a little bit overdone. Do you think what's the thing that would annoy you if you're listening to commentary? What do you think is a bad trait to have in commentary?
A bad trait to have in commentary. So I'll be honest, I do quite a lot of shouting myself, but I'm learning as I go every time to find the right balance. And it always varies from series to series and length of race to length of race. I feel Murray Walker was a legend in his own right, but I don't think there's any perfect way to commentate over a particular race. But in terms of things that perhaps are bad habits, I think one of the biggest things that I have noticed, I've learned from as I've developed in sim racing, is sometimes you find that commentators don't necessarily have the realization that sometimes it's better to be quiet and not say anything to perhaps build up a little bit of tension. So, for example, when all the cars are on the grid and you're waiting for lights to go out, sometimes it's actually better just to be quiet and wait for those lights to go out, because you naturally are building up tension. Whereas I find some commentators want to talk all the way up to lights out of where we go and just cannot stop talking, and that's fair enough. But it sometimes just perhaps takes away a little bit of the tone. And the other thing, and recently actually a gentleman I've worked with, a guy named Callum Swift, absolutely fantastic guy, and he's covering our F4 series at Next Gen at the moment. I think he's definitely got a great talent for it. One thing that I found working with him is that sometimes, particularly when there's two of you commentating as the lead commentator, I've had to be very mindful of the time left in the race, because obviously we could talk on forever, but if we're on the final lap and we've only got 3 corners to go, we need to make sure we focus on talking about the guy who is about to win the race. And that's something that he and I have learned to develop together, is that time awareness with regards to, there is a time and a place to have the long bit of babble about the car and talking out all the ins and outs whilst we've got a quiet space in the race. Whereas when we're on that final lap, attention's got to be that checker flag is coming. We need to focus on the lead guy, because this is his or her moment and they deserve everything in the spotlight.
No, that's really good, actually, isn't it? I mean, I always remember when you're coming on the grid, or the grid is forming, and you quite, it was wonderful to hear the noise, because the cars are spinning their wheels coming up to the grid, aren't they? And even in touring cars and other stuff, they are trying to get their tires warmed up. Everything's kind of there, so you want to kind of let the audience hear some of that too, so they can hear the noise, and then in turn, when it all goes quiet, as it kind of lowers down before the man with the green flag kind of comes across, isn't it? Or they get the 5-second board and comes across. So it's I think it's really important that we get the atmosphere and how it all goes, and that's what I mean. I know they don't always shout, but and as you say, shouting at the right point is fine when there's something to actually describe that is exciting or historic, or something that is the main part of the race, isn't it? But that's the thing. It's been quite interesting, because on F1, for example, on Sky, they've got quite a lot of different commentators at the moment, because Brundle's away quite a lot. How have you found like the F1 commentators? Do you quite like that kind of style that they do?
I do, and I think I can actually bring that into a question that Rue Rambling on in the YouTube chat has said about the relationship you develop with a co-commentator. How important is it? And I think you get different dynamics between commentary pairs, and having that variety keeps things fresh, albeit there are some legendary commentary pairs such as Murray Walker and James Hunt, where Walker would always get something wrong and Hunt would correct him, but Hunt always had that very laid back approach, whereas Walker was always at a level of tension, and they bounced off each other. And I found working with different commentators that I've even had a similar approach. So when I covered the British Truck Racing Championship alongside Pointy the Plumber, I kept referring to the trucks as cars. And in the end, what was originally annoying him turned into a running joke in the end, where every time I said car, we didn't encourage people to take a drink, obviously, because PG-13. But in the end, it became more and more gas to the point we actually panned to the commentary booth of him writing on my notepad and putting on the camera the word truck because of whatnot. But coming full circle, I think building those relationships is really good, but having that flexibility to have different commentary pairs and different groups of commentators covering an event from round to round is great because it keeps things fresh, it keeps things new for the viewer, but also sometimes what ends up happening is you end up whereby it injects some new life. So you find some commentators, they love focusing on perhaps the technical aspect of the car and they won't stop talking about it, but they don't really talk about perhaps how a driver should approach a particular circuit. And then you get a fresh face in, such as the next driver, and they just inject that into the commentary booth in the next round. And it keeps drawing you in. It means there's something for everybody over the whole season of commentary, because let's not forget, some people may absolutely love Crofty in Formula One, others may absolutely love Brundle, but it's not going to fit to everyone's taste. There's no one who's perfect in the eyes of everybody.
Yeah, I liked the Brundle Coulthard era when they were at the BBC for a couple of years. I thought they were really good together. Now here's the big question as well for you. I know it's I'm sure it's one you've had before. If you could talk to any commentator from the past or present, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Oh, goodness me. That is a good question to put me on the spot. So if it was from someone of in fact, the person I would pick would be David Addison. So current BTCC commentator and also GT World Challenge commentator. The reason I would pick David Addison is because I feel that he has and continues to cover a whole variety of different motorsport disciplines, whether it's GT3 racing, touring car. I believe he even covers some dirt oval racing in the United Kingdom, or at least I do see on his Twitter feed he loves following it around the United Kingdom. But the question I would ask him is, because it is obviously his career and he's one of the most established individuals out there, and I think he's even covered the likes of Le Mans as well, is what is your best way to prepare your notes for a given event, series, or race? Because that's one of the things I'm currently trying to work my way through, because I've worked on a whole variety of scales, from being too prepared in terms of notes to not having enough and having to flesh things out on the day. And I think I'm finally finding a middle ground. But I just find with Addison, it's almost as if the man's got it absolutely planted into his mind exactly what he's going to say and when. And regardless of the co-commentator he's working with, whether it's Tim Harvey from a BTCC perspective or John Watson from a GT World Challenge, he just seems to have always the right amount of ammunition to make sure that even in the quietest spots, he's always got something to talk about. And he's a bit of a role model for me, whereas I would love to say Murray Walker, but unfortunately being deceased, I think the question I would ask Murray Walker is, if you could do it again and start again in the modern era of motorsport, keeping in mind Walker came up in the time where the concept of televised motorsport wasn't a thing. I would be curious as to what his recommendation would be, how he would get into motorsport and commentary nowadays compared to how he came into it back then.
I actually was listening to, it was on YouTube, the last race he ever commentated on, which was the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring in 2007. It came up on in my feed on YouTube, and I thought, I've got to watch that. And it was just so refreshing. It was so good. It was like, that's the kind of commentary that if you want to go into commentary, you'd want to learn how that is done. Almost, because it was just so well done. It was it was great to see. I mean, I do have to admit, I do like the BTCC commentary. I think they do a great job. And I always find it funny when you see the Sky F1, especially when they do the pit lane stuff, or the presenters that kind of do the main show before it goes to the race, because they always wear the khaki trousers and a shirt, and and they're sitting on a stool somewhere with their microphone, talking away, and it's quite good. I like Damon Hill when he does it. I really like Johnny Herbert. I was always a big fan of Johnny Herbert because he kind of brought a few laughs to it as well. And I think humor is vital when you have motorsport as well, when you're doing something on the build-up. It's nice to have a bit of fun when you're doing that. It's a pity they couldn't have Gerhard Berger, because he always used to be playing pranks on everyone, wasn't it? That was his thing. Between him and Senna, they used to play all sorts of pranks. And I remember one time when they had Damon Hill and Johnny Herbert doing a grid walk, and that was great fun. Have you ever done a kind of, you did say you'd kind of done a grid walk when you were doing all the different races in one weekend to try and find out what was going on. Is that something you would fancy having a go at?
Oh, I'd love to. I would love to do a full grid walk of a given series, but it's one of those whereby I think it's. So I've done a number of interviews in. So for those unaware, particularly when you've got a race weekend where there's multiple races going on at once, and where it's grassroots motorsport, or even the likes of BTCC, funnily enough, over the weekend where they have filling series or support series such as the Virtue Mini Challenge. What you find is, whilst there's a race going on out on circuit, you have what is called the staging or the preparation area, where the cars of the next race have been called to. All the drivers are sat in their cars waiting to go, and doing interviews or interviewing as many drivers as possible in that staging area. That feels like, in a way, a little bit of a grid walk, but it's one of the challenges there, much like what we've seen in the likes of Formula One, is some drivers don't want to talk and their mechanics are stood there by the car saying, no, they don't want to talk right now. And meanwhile, others have got all the time in the world to talk to you. And I think it's helping them get rid of their pre-race nerves. But you've got to find that balance between trying to grab as many people as possible perspectives, not get too caught up with the ones who want to talk forever, no disrespect to them, and also trying to just get a couple words out, the ones who are very camera shy or sort of, no, I don't want to speak to the camera. And funny enough, they're sometimes the best ones. If you can grab them for just 10 seconds, they sometimes say the funniest things because it's completely caught them by surprise.
That was my next question. What's been the funniest thing that somebody said to you, or the craziest thing that somebody said to you when you've been interviewing them on the grid or in the pit lane?
Oh, goodness me. I think the funniest one I've ever had when I interviewed, I can't remember when it was for life of me. When was it? In fact, it was at Mallory Park. I interviewed a driver there. And what he was saying to me, I said to him, how are you feeling for Mallory Park and the circuit, given it's a short, but it's a very aggressive circuit? And he went, oh, is it? I've never driven around here before. And I said, well, haven't you done the practice or qualifying? He said, no, I literally turned up about half an hour ago, ready to race. I'll let you know when I get to the checkered flag. And I interviewed him the next day and went, so what do you think of Mallory Park? And he said, yeah, wasn't bad, was it? All right, I'll give it a go again. I'll catch you out there. But he was just so
mad, isn't it?
Absolutely baseline playing with the way he phrased it and whatnot. It was just sort of, you know what? He's just a normal guy. That's what I love about it, is the fact these guys are celebrities for the weekend, but actually off the circuit, they're just normal people like you and I, just enjoy motorsport. And that's what sometimes it should just all be about, is the fact that they're not the Lewis Hamiltons of the world, but give them this weekend and they feel like the Lewis Hamiltons of the world.
No, it is, because we are coming to watch them, aren't they? That's the thing. And they're out there to try and do a really good job. Now, I see that there is a next generation kind of sign on your jacket there. Tell me about what that is all about and what you're doing with them.
So Next Gen Racing, as I mentioned earlier, they're the ones who really enabled me to make the step from just volunteering my time to do sim racing commentary to to actually cover in a paid professional status, if you will, sim racing events. So again, covered multiple sets, of course, competizione and iRacing. Next Gen Racing have been going for the best part now of, I want to say, goodness me, if I get this wrong, they won't be too happy. 17 years they've been running for now, covering a whole variety of platforms. They started on console, moved to PC, but they're more than just sim racing. A number of the guys at Next Gen Racing also work circuit side as track officials, as marshals. And funny enough, if it were not for them, I'd never had the opportunity to be put in touch with Live Sport Now and in touch with Ian Walthouse and get my opportunity, if you will, to be behind the real life microphone. And that was all through one of the guys who was a marshal at an event that Ian was commentating at, literally called Ian because he talked to him previously and said to Ian, you know what, we've got a guy here who we think could actually be a real life commentator one day. Would you mind giving him a try at a small event that you've got? And Ian was sort of, yeah, I don't mind doing that at all. Give me his details. And that's how it all began. So the Next Gen Racing guys, a great community, UK-based community, but we welcome anybody from around the world. In fact, we've got Australian drivers racing our touring car championship. And this is not me just saying it for promotional material. I would honestly believe it when I say that they do host one of, if not the very best touring car racing championships on the sim racing platform of iRacing, the NXTCC, which, if anybody's thinking, is that plagiarism of the BTCCC? Yeah, pretty much. That's what we tried to base it around. We do all success ballast, free races every round, like the British Touring Car Championship. And we've even had drivers like Michael Crees, Mikey Doble, some of you may be aware of, the 88 Army driver. He raced on the grid with us. Fantastic to talk to him. And by having that relationship between real life drivers and sim racing drivers, it's great to see how it pushes everybody on. And that's what Next Gen Racing really tries to focus on, is the idea that we're sim racers, but we also do work in real life motorsport, and we're trying to bring the two worlds together to sort of say to people, look, you know what? You turn up on a Tuesday evening for the Touring Car Championship, you get a race alongside the likes of Mikey Doble or even Bobby Thompson when he's able to make it. And in our other series, like the GT3s, we're trying to take a similar approach. In fact, I think we've even had Antonio Giovinazzi on the grid a couple of times there, albeit only in very limited capacity, but just the fact that
Formula One. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Maybe you'll get Lance Stroll soon. I think he might be on his way out after his performance in Brazil. But no, it's quite a thing. That now I was going to say, Rue has got a good question here. I will quickly come back to it. How hard do you find it to fight your own self-consciousness instead of just being yourself into the mic?
So it's funny enough, it's a really good question. And what I would say is you're always going to get feedback from people, which is to say the likes of, this commentator's terrible, they don't know what they're talking about, etc. Don't worry about that. If somebody wants to give you feedback where they think you're not doing a great job, ask for the constructive feedback. Say, okay, what should I do better then in order to provide the commentary that you like? And I've had some of that with the real life commentary. I've had plenty of it in the sim racing commentary, and you learn from that. But people just say this is rubbish. Well, if they think they can do better, surely they can also give it a try. That's what you want to think inside, but you don't ever want to show it, because at the end of the day, having those sort of nasty thoughts inside, it's not helpful for anyone. So then coming on to the self-conscious bits, I just, like I'm talking to you right now, I just simply go for it. I just talk as normal and absolutely just settle into it, because at the end of the day, the thing with commentary which makes it work is when it's natural. So each of us will have their own style. Hugh, you may be of a different style. You may not perhaps be as bombastic as other individuals. You may be more than the others, etc. The same with myself. You make the show at the end of the day. You're the one who is helping to provide the entertainment, because if you just showed the racing on screen with no commentary, well, that's great. But you give it a personality. You bring it to life for the viewer. And therefore, don't be afraid. If you make mistakes, you have to roll with it. If you get a driver's door number wrong, you can do one or two things. You can either very quickly correct yourself if you recognize it, go, actually, that's not number 13, that's number 27 of Carl Johnson. Or you can simply just roll with it and go, yeah, that's number 13, and think to yourself in the back of the mind, that's number 27. But you know what? We're just going to go with this anyway, because I'm mid-fault right now. And that is how you work around the self-consciousness side. It's hard. And at first, you may ask yourself multiple times, did I say the right thing? But the funny thing as well is actually, and this is something I've learned not just in the commentary space, but in life as well. The first thing that normally comes to mind when somebody asks you a question, or you put yourself on the spot and ask yourself a question, you've normally said the right answer the first time round, or at least what you think is the right answer. And that's the self-confidence you have to go in with, because otherwise you end up stuttering, you end up umming and ahhing, and that's where you lose the momentum in the commentary. And that's when it really starts to suffer in the perspective. If you keep tripping over yourself, it's not ideal. It's not to say you can't have breaks or whatnot. And that's another thing as well. Don't be afraid to take a pause and take a sip of water. That helps you in order to realign your thoughts, and it enables you to get away with things if you're taking a cheeky drink. And you can even say in the commentary, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water, and then we'll be back to the racing.
Yeah. As you say, that gives you a few seconds to think if you've gone off tangent, or if you've forgotten what you were going to say again, isn't it? Or it comes back to you, gives you a chance to realign. No, it's what's been it, because obviously you've done a lot of commentary yourself. You've obviously seen a lot of commentary. I have some favourite times I remember James Hunt describing a crash that Philip Alliot had many years ago. It was late 80s, and it's a famous one because he nearly took Mansell out. I think it was at Portugal. And he says, "Oh, there goes Alliot, and nearly took out Mansell." And Alliot, who always crashes, or crashes anyway, he always crashes anyway. There's a great character that comes out with that, and I think maybe certain commentators can perhaps get away with that. Do you think? I mean, in that era as well, I think Hunt and Murray were so well liked that kind of people expected them to kind of come out with these kind of things, wasn't it? Or Murray would make a mistake that would be quite funny, or things like that. Do you think maybe that's probably been toned down now? You can't really get away with saying things like that.
I think so. I mean, personally, when I've worked alongside other commentators, and I've also listened to certain commentary, particularly in the sim racing space. I think in
Yeah,
the real world space, a lot more of it is self-censored. I mean, there are rules that I've been told. I mean, the obvious ones, which is don't swear live on air, or it's going to have to
yeah,
be bleeped out
yeah,
afterwards. I
yeah,
mean, we've had interviews with drivers where they've sworn, and we just had to go, well, sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen, in front of the
yeah,
driver you're interviewing, to sort
yeah,
of give the reminder, please don't swear, but you know what, we're
yeah,
rolling with it. Don't apologize for it right now. We get it. It's in the heat of the moment. And
yeah.
that's one thing I should emphasize in real life motorsport, much like with sim racing motorsport.
Mm.
Don't worry about what people say at the time, because unless it is something incredibly racist or whatnot, it's a political view and it goes completely out of the tone. A lot of people are just saying what comes from the heart. They are being
Yeah,
themselves behind the
yeah,
microphone, and people who accidentally swear will do it, and then they might realize it afterwards that that's just them as a person because of upbringing, etc., or culture. So that's the first part. But then coming to your question a bit more in terms of, I found that certain things have been said in the sim racing commentary space where I've sort of sat there whilst they're saying it and going, I would not say that myself. In fact, I'm quite horrified at that. But you know what? We're going to roll with it because I'm not going to break character here. And at the end of the day, that is my opinion. I can't let it impinge on the commentary. But what I can potentially do to assist the commentary is actually try and steer the commentary away from it, just in case I'm
yeah,
worried that certain viewers may be distressed by what's been said. They might be slightly offended. So you have to, when you pick up on things like it, you just have to think, okay, you know what? It's been said now. We can't fix it. Don't be apologetic about it. Apologize
yeah,
after the fact, after it's all happened. If you feel it's something that's not appropriate, steer away from it and try, if you feel confident, to provide some guidance to the other commentator or the interviewee and whatnot. We should be saying that live on air. And it's funny as well, if you sometimes do that little mini telling off, if you will, the way people pick up on it, they get a little bit embarrassed, but they sort of, yeah, whoops, I should not have said that live on air. But again,
yeah.
that all
I
builds
laughed it
to
off.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah,
laugh it
yeah.
off.
So here's the thing for you. I remember Ayrton Senna in an interview saying he really didn't like when people would ask him, "How do you feel about a specific event, or how are you feeling about this?" So imagine you're going to interview the legendary Ayrton Senna, and it's been a big race. He's won a big race. How would you get around saying? Asking that question of not asking that question, how do you feel, but making sure that you get the point that you need across. What would you say?
So I'd flip it the question around, and well, if he'd won by quite a significant distance in the given race, I'd say, so that looks like quite a comfortable victory there, Ayrton. I mean, any thoughts on that? And the fact your competitors were 40 seconds behind? I try to invert it into his performance versus
Mm.
his rivals rather than how do you feel. So try and make it a bit more of a targeted question, perhaps, or ask the question, look, you know what, in the last 20 laps of the race, fastest lap after fastest lap. I mean, you absolutely dominated this. You must have been absolutely locked in and focused behind the car, because you steer away. I get the challenge with that. It's the generic question. How do you feel? I mean, you could describe 101 things. I feel elated. I feel tired, etc. But
Yeah,
I
yeah,
try and pinpoint it on a particular thing that's happened over the course of the race to celebrate what the drivers achieved in that instance.
yeah. And if there was a race in the past that you would have loved to have been able to commentate on live, what would it have been?
Oh goodness me! It's straight away. Albeit, I don't know if I'll be able to hold it together. It would be the 2012 Canadian Grand Prix where Jenson Button took victory after 4 hours and
Yeah,
plenty of
yeah.
rain, and taking out both his teammate and also Fernando Alonso in the process.
Yeah. I remember watching that on that Sunday night, and it kept going, and all these kind of the big huge delay, and then as you say, Jenson Button coming from last on the grid, and then when he was up behind Vettel in the last few corners of the last few laps, literally, and then Vettel just went wide, didn't he? Just ran wide, turn 5 or 6, and my goodness me, and you just thought you could almost feel the momentum kind of building up and then coming through, and I mean it was also, it was getting dark as well, wasn't it? They were running out of time to do the race. But no, it's quite a thing. So have you ever found that when you've tried to interview somebody in the pits, obviously it's a big part of the preparation, that how do you get around someone who you think might not want to talk to you as much, or it's how do you approach someone that you've not met before, and maybe say it's a big team event? How have you found that? Because that's quite a daunting prospect.
So I think I've used this approach in the sim racing world, and I found it's very good in the real life racing commentary space as well. If you come with someone who doesn't really want to talk much, or just simply gives one line answers,
Give me Raikkonen one.
Precisely. You just got to go with it. What you
Yeah.
do is you instead go, right, if they're only going to give me one-line answers, try and focus on a bit more of not a targeted question, because one of the things that interviewers I found can do, and I've been guilty of it in the past and I've learned from it, is they start asking a question that's so long, it's just going to end up in a yes/no answer regardless.
Yeah.
But you make
Yeah.
it quite an open question to make that person think about what they're going to say. And that sometimes brings them a little bit more out of their shell. So instead of asking, so do you think you can win the race today? Well, they might just say yes. Instead, what you can say is, look, we've seen in practice, the Audis are down on pace. What can you do to get around it in the race? They may go, we'll drive faster. But then again, that's a bit of comedy
Yeah, that's quite good.
entertainment.
Yeah.
So, right. Or they might go, we know what, we've made some changes to the setup of the car and we're hopeful that that's actually going to give us the pace. You sort of have to think, okay, if somebody naturally if somebody feels as though they're very shy or just only want to give those one-word answers, you try and give them more open questions. The other side of the coin being, if it's somebody who is perhaps not used to the euphoria or the sense of the situation, perhaps it's their first time actually racing, whether it's sim racing or real life, you try and give them more gentle questions, or you focus a little bit more about them as a character on the grid. So you sort of say to them, this is your first time racing in this league. How excited are you to be on the grid for the first time doing your first ever race? And that sort of reminds them, look, you're part of this community now. Welcome to it. Tell us your story a little bit. And that sort of warms them up a little bit to the fact, you know what? I don't need to be nervous. I just need to be myself.
Yeah, and just fun and just enjoy it, isn't it? Just be there in the moment, making it happen. I've got another kind of a question of historical relevance, and see how you get on this. For I think it's quite good fun, because these are the kind of things you think about in a race, and how do you cope with it? Let's say you're at Abu Dhabi and it's 2021. The race has just finished, and you've got to interview Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. What would you say, first of all, to Lewis when he's sitting there in second place?
I mean, you put me on the spot here, given it was the question that destroyed my enthusiasm for Formula One for the best part of a year and a half.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
And not because I'm a Hamilton fan, I should point out. I just didn't like the way it ended. I love Hamilton and Verstappen and their whole dynamic, just a heartbreak the way it had to end. But what I would say in that situation is, well, you can't really talk about the judicial decision because, I mean, you start to throw motorsport and politics in. So you'd have to target the question around, you know what, Lewis, it hasn't worked out today, whether it's through what you've been able to do on the circuit or what's happened as a result of safety cars, etc. But you gave it everything out there. I mean, you must feel as though this championship campaign has just thrown everything which way and what's. I mean, if you had to sum it up in a word, what would it be? Just put something out there, just a completely deflectory question to say, you know what, forget all the politics, forget everything that's happened. Let's just talk about your description, your feelings at the moment. But we're not just going to say, how do you feel? Because that's going to end up in one of 100 different things. But you've got to try and steer it away.
Yeah, you did pretty well with that one, because I thought that's a good one, because it suddenly came into my head. I thought that would be, because also you've got the drama and all the atmosphere and the way the crowd were going. It was so, people were kind of in shock, weren't they? It was a kind of very divisive way of the end of the title, but then a great motorsport history. It does add to F1 history, doesn't it? They have these incredible moments where these things kind of happen, isn't it?
And the thing is, it's, whilst we look at it in the modern era and think, you know what, that's absolutely outrageous. The FIA potentially got away with murder, etc., with regards to motorsport and what happened there. We then think back to things that happened in, say, for example, was it 1995, the Hill Schumacher incident in Adelaide that gave Schumacher the title when Hill's suspension collapsed? We got that. We got the altercation between Villeneuve and Schumacher at Jerez in 1997.
Yeah.
You've got all those, and it's just obviously in the more modern era, everything's under a lot more scrutiny. You now have the power of social media and the fact that everybody gets their news within 5 seconds. I mean, I'd be grateful my instant coffee arrived in 5 seconds. But the time has changed, and the way we all react to the most controversial moments has changed with it. But it doesn't change the fact they're the controversies, and we can keep going back. I mean, many you would argue the question of, okay, what about the 1975 or 76 Fuji Grand Prix, the first ever televised Grand Prix, Hunt versus Lauda, and well, what could have been if Lauda hadn't retired from that race after a lap? But we can't know. It's a controversial moment, technically.
Yeah. That's thing. Now I've got a great question from Aces, so let me quickly get that for you here. He's saying, "Hi Hugh and hi Paul. Hope both of you are well. As a commentator myself, trying to break through into real life motorsport into next year at a younger age. Do we look that old? Have you ever had any races that where nothing went to plan from a racing perspective?"
That is a good question. So, I presume we're talking here about real life motorsport and things not going to plan from a racing perspective. So, I at Mallory Park, I'll give an example. I won't talk about the specific race and whatnot. I don't think it's appropriate. But what I will say is that literally it was lights out and away we go. And then suddenly, huge accident into turn one. Two cars came together. And because at Mallory Park it had rained very heavily in the build up before the race and indeed in the days before, what it meant was, and many of you will have seen this in multiple motorsport disciplines, the grass that surrounds the circuit was literally a swamp. And if a car went into the grass, you couldn't get any traction. You would just slide across the grass, hit a barrier, and then just become entrenched in the grass. So it meant for the best part of 25 minutes, we had to fill out the show with me just constantly talking into the microphone and finding things to talk about for 25 minutes. And keep in mind, I don't have the ability to see more than what's on my phone. I'm looking at the playback of the broadcast on a Zoom call on a phone that is literally this size. And I'm stood there with a microphone, which is this cup, and I'm having to do that whilst also looking out there to see, are they moving the car? Is the driver out okay? And I'm trying to listen to the broadcast director in my ear, who's also trying to look through the different cameras we've got set up to sort of advise, okay, what's going on? And in that situation, what we did, because nothing went to plan technically, is we took the approach of, okay, well, I'm going to just talk about more the marshalling side, and I'll talk a bit about the fact as soon as we know anything about the drivers that they're okay, they're out the cars, we'll give you an update. And I was waiting for the director to give that in my ear or for somebody to tell me over my shoulder. But okay, I'll talk a bit more about the marshals, what they do, and the fact, the importance of safety in motorsport. And you turn it into, you know what, this could be a really bad bunch. You don't know whether somebody has been severely injured. It could be just literally a little bit of a bruising, all the way through to, let's hope it never happens, of course, it could be fatality. Didn't happen in this instance, to be fair. It's just a few bruises and knocks. But you try to turn it into something which people may take an interest in, because there's a lot of people out there, for example, who they probably look at motorsport marshals and go, well, I'd love to be a marshal. I mean, they get to stand right next to the circuit. And if they're having a good day, they don't need to do anything other than watch racing, which is true. I can confirm that from speaking to 5 different marshals at the Next Gen Racing Group, where they literally say the best days are where they're just paid where they're not paid. They volunteered to sit there and do nothing for a couple of hours. But that's one. And then another example I will give, and this is a really funny example actually at Mallory Park as well. Well, in fact, no, I won't use that one. I will use what happened in my recent coverage of the Caterham Academy weekend at Donington Park. It was so windy on the first day, I think it was the first day, that multiple cameras that we had set up in fixed positions were constantly shaking. One of them because it was so high, and we were hitting, I think, 60-mile-an-hour winds on that camera. So it meant, whereas our cameras that Hugh and I have are stationary, you can imagine my camera bouncing up and down like that. That's the camera we had for the start-finish line. So in the end, it became a running joke. No, that's not our cameraman who's drunk. That's just how strong the wind is, and our cameraman is nodding to indicate how high the wind is. And we actually lost multiple cameras over the course of multiple races because of the fact they were being blown over, blown out of position. And we just had to go, right, ladies and gentlemen, if you're tuning in right now, you're not going to be able to see the racing that goes for the old hairpin up towards McLean's because our camera's been blown over, such is the strength of the wind, but we will fill you in as best we can. You have to improvise because nothing is going to go perfect. And I think that is the one thing that sim racing commentary, it can teach you, but it doesn't perhaps teach you as much, because if you're like me coming up and you do both the broadcast management, so you imagine the cameras and what's appearing on screen, plus the commentary, you have full control over what you display when you want to display it. If you're working with somebody who is the broadcast director, they're doing the cameras and you're the commentator, that's a good example of where you lose that control over everything that's happening. And the director may say to you, oh, well, for crying out loud, my PC's just crashed. You're now going to be fixed on this driver for the next 10 minutes, which I've had happen. And you think, right, I've got to improvise. I've got to fill out the gap. If I feel as I'm struggling, I will explain to people tuning in that we have currently got a problem. We are stuck here watching this driver, but you just roll with it. You have to roll with what you got. And that's where having additional notes prepared and whatnot will massively help you, because for example, one thing you can do to fill in is, if you have the notes available, talk a bit about the circuit that everybody's racing at if you've got a lull, because people would love to know, for example, in a broadcast I recently did where we just sat on the grid waiting, there was a delay. It was at Fuji International Speedway, and a lot of people didn't know that the F1 Lexus machines actually stands for Fuji, because that's the official test circuit of Lexus and Toyota. But throwing in that quick whip, that covers 30 seconds. Then you can throw in another one, for example, the fact that Fuji's gone for about 4 track iterations. You have to have notes on standby to prepare for those where things don't go to plan. So hopefully that's a long way of answering your question, Aces stroke Alex, but hopefully that gives you some ideas of when things don't go to plan, what you could do. And I mean, some of the things that haven't gone to plan, for example, is spiders deciding to form webs over cameras in real life. You have to turn the camera off and go, well, there's an example of a spider that's taking residence because it's so rainy, but we're going to turn that camera off, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, by the way, I can't say this live on air, but my cameraman now has actually had to run all the way around the circuit to go fix that camera. So we're now stuck with 2 cameras, and I'm by myself if any technical issues happen in the meantime.
No, that sounds kind of crazy, isn't it? But I suppose that's what you have to be able to do. When I was talking to one of the guys that I work with for commentary, and we were talking about the Spa circuit, and because it was the first time I had kind of done it, you're trying to think of things to say in between the racing if there's a small lull. And of course, I said, "Oh yeah, this is where the Formula One cars come round," and blah blah blah, a different story. And at the end, I told him this, and of course, and he said, "Yeah, a lot of if it's a GT3 race, don't mention links to other types of racing at that track." So in other words, because GT3 drivers who are maybe sim racers might not be interested in Formula One, and that might take away from the race, which I think is actually a very good key point, actually. Do you agree with that? Do you think that if it's about a particular type of racing, like say for example touring cars or Formula 4, you have to try and be specific to that race as much as possible, even if there's a lull in the commentary or a lull in the race?
So it's a good question. So I think there are certain historical races. So if we use Donington Park, for example, I mean, most of us who absolutely love motorsport will be aware of the 1993 European Grand Prix, the only time that Formula One has raced at Donington Park, and the absolutely infamous first lap drive from Ayrton Senna.
I saw it live.
Absolutely brilliant one. I'm envious of you, I must admit, but that shows our age differences. But you don't look a day over 18, I should say. But
a day over 80. My goodness, it was like I had to get my senior citizens card.
But with regards to then coming full circle, I think it's good that you can call upon historical events in motorsport, the sort of Hall of Fame moments, if you will. But yes, you always want to try and do your best to tailor the commentary to what's relevant. So, for example, covering Caterham Academy racing, because the Caterham Motorsport ladder is very specific. I mean, if you go to the Caterham Motorsport website, you'll see there's 5 different tiers. Because of that, you can talk a lot about the interlinking. You can also talk about Caterham racing around the world and the fact that it's universal, but we're here today in the UK focusing on it. And you can also talk a little bit about the fact of that the academy is, and also the motorsport ladder, is focused on giving drivers their first steps into motorsport, and they have gone on to race into series like British GT. So that's naturally your link to GT3 racing, because you can say this particular driver 10 years ago actually moved into GT3 racing, British GT, and actually won the championship. So that's a really good segue.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if you're covering, say, touring car, and you start throwing out loads of facts and items with regards to, say, IndyCar racing at a similar circuit or whatnot, but there's no natural link, that is where it loses out. And in fact, that's what you don't want to do, because you're starting to perhaps indicate that your interest isn't in the motorsport you're covering, whether it's sim or real life. And
that's a good
that
point.
was the hardest thing for me with truck racing. I had to do a lot of research beforehand, is to understand exactly how truck racing works from a perspective. How do you get involved, the different types of truck racing? But thankfully, alongside my notes, I had a chance to talk to a number of the organizers for the different series racing there, and they gave me so many pointers. I was sort of, you know what, I don't need to worry about references now. They fed me all the information I need.
Oh, that's kind of the thing. So it really shows that preparation is absolutely key. Is that you've got to have your notes, you've got to have your history of the circuit, you've got to have the history of the championship, you've got to know where people are in that championship before they start the race, so that you're aware. You've got to know the numbers and who's in each car, have a good idea of what's going on, because these are kind of vital, isn't it? Because if anything happens and you're left with the mic to do it yourself, you've got to be able to come up with things to say. And I think that's the key. You kind of think, oh, I'm watching a race, I'll just talk about the race. But actually, there's an awful lot more.
if I may jump in, that's
Yeah,
a very good point, and I think that's perhaps something that's not as visible when we think of Formula One. And you've got like David Coulthard and goodness me, I'm trying to remember names here. Nico Rosberg, for example, they all follow the Formula One, what would be carnival around the world. So they're quite
yeah,
dedicated to that series. Now, I'll be honest, one of my dreams or my next target in the real life commentary space would be to become the official voice of a series for a year. So follow that
yeah,
series around the United Kingdom or wherever for all of its rounds, because then coming to your point, I'm covering the entire story of the season.
yeah, yeah,
But if you're starting out, you might one month be covering trucks, the next month you might be covering KTM. So I use myself. I can't know the story of that entire season. I can do the research, I can get the tables, I can create the points tables and go, you know what, this driver who's leading the championship has won 10 races, his rivals only won 9, but has enough podiums to be equal on points. I can get the statistics, but unless I go back and watch every broadcast, which I don't have time for, understandably, because of
yeah,
balancing personal life and whatnot, I can't bring that to life. But then again, as one of my mentors has said to me, at the end of the day, say what you see. That should be the
yeah,
thing that's at the core of your mind. And if you can add any flavor on top of that, that's the big Brucey bonus from that point onwards. And that's where the notes, the points, they're all where you can add the flavor. But if you're focusing on the race in front, that's what people care about the most. Of course, if it's a final round of the championship, then people are concerned about more of the history of the season. But if it's
yeah,
midway through the season, people forget there's a season on
yeah,
until it
yeah,
matters for the final round. So I just wanted to jump in there because I think that's
yeah,
one
yeah,
thing a lot of people don't recognize is that commentators aren't just dedicated to series. They might hop from one discipline to another, week to week or month to month, and they may not have the time to get the full story of every series they cover.
yeah. No, it's very interesting because a lot of us here love to do commentary. We've maybe done it a little bit ourselves. In fact, I've got another question from Aces, which I'll ask in a wee second. But to know the real crucial points, because you don't want to look a fool when you're trying to do it properly. You want to try and make a good impression, isn't it? And try and get it right from the start so that you're on the right track, and then you can just improve on how you build on your career in that, or how how your strengths of in commentary. But to go to Ace's question, if you had to choose one event format for the rest of your career, would you choose sprint or endurance?
Can I have both?
Mhm.
No, that's a really good question. So for me personally, presuming we define sprint based on the Motorsport UK regulations, I would prefer to cover sprint races just because endurance races are fine to cover, don't get me wrong. But I find with endurance, and this is something, again, I think I need to develop over time and get more experience on,
Hmm.
with endurance races, because they are longer, they require a more gentle and relaxed style of commentary. Whereas I love to really get behind all the emotions of the
Yeah,
race. Over
yeah,
15 minutes, so much can happen. But if you expand
yeah,
that to 150 minutes, so a factor of 10, so 2.5 hours of that instance, you can't. It's very hard to maintain that energy from lights out all the way through to that final checker flag. It's possible, but you have to be very careful how you do it. That's why I prefer sprint, just because it's full of energy by default because the race isn't that long. And I
yeah,
can really inject myself into the race. Not so I can't do endurance, but that's something I'm working on. But I think with time, I might feel as though I might lean more into endurance because that requires its own style of commentary. And that's where, I mean, if anyone's watched the 2024 race at Le Mans, the 24 Hour of
yeah,
Le Mans, some very interesting things got said over the course of the nighttime stint of the commentary, which I don't think I can repeat for the purposes of this podcast. And indeed, I think over even one of the 6 or the 12-hour races of IMSA or earlier this year, there was some very interesting remarks made by the commentators during the night stints. But that's where you have to sort of be inventive, but that's also where tiredness and late night commentary can kick in. So
yeah,
sprints
yeah.
would be my answer.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, I really appreciate it because you've given us already over an hour's worth of your time with these excellent indicators and advice on how to be a good commentator. But you're obviously doing current championships just now, and a lot of it on sim racing and then obviously real racing. Where can we catch you? Where can we, if people want to go and see your work and hear your voice, where can they do that?
So there's multiple places to do so. So with regards to sim racing, you'll find that I'm continuing to cover the Next Gen Racing Touring Car Championship, or the NXTCC. So that will be on their official YouTube and also Facebook channel. So if you go on YouTube and type in Next Gen Racing as spelt here, then you'll be able to tune it in on YouTube, or on Facebook. There's the official group you can tune in there.
All
If you
right.
want to cover any series that I cover for other organisations, so particularly previously the Middle of the Pack Racing League, and I'm actually starting to cover a Super Formula Series this weekend with a North American group called League Zero. You can check all of the racing action out and that on my personal Twitch channel, and that's at twitch.tv/TX141. And all the racing action there will be on Saturdays on a post-race broadcast where the racing's already happened, but I'm covering as if it were live, and I have no spoilers beforehand, so I go into it completely blind. And it's always good to have all the drivers watching that as well, and they get to see all the racing they didn't get to see because they were elsewhere on the grid when I'm looking at the front of the field, for example. So Next Gen's YouTube channel, alternatively my own Twitch channel, would be the best places to catch me. And with regards to the real life commentary, I mean, there's no guarantees as to what exactly I'm covering in 2025, but if you do follow me on Facebook, you can look me up on Facebook as Paul Walsh or on Twitter as TX141. I'll be putting in announcements there when I'm in the commentary booth covering real life motorsport.
Yeah, I've got your YouTube channel as well in the description.
Oh, yep. That's
I'll need to put your Twitter one in as well. And in fact, if you can send me some of those links, actually, I'll put it on the Discord because we've got our Discord channel, and I can use that and put that on our community posts as well that we do as well. But what would be if you could give, say, one kind of example for new budding commentators who are just getting started? What would it be?
An example of work I've done, or
sorry, like a word of advice for new commentators. What would you say would be the most important thing that you need to do if you're going to go into commentary? If you're starting out.
My best bit of advice would be, and this is what I've always stuck to, regardless: believe in yourself and learn from every experience. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect by any means. I learn from every time I do commentary, whether it's sim or real life. Going with that attitude, no, you are going to take punches. As we talked about earlier in this podcast, you are going to get people who tell you you don't know what you're doing. You may not know what you're doing the first time you do it, but you know what? You can learn from that, and the next time you won't make the same mistake twice. Or if you do, you learn from it the next time after that. Never never deviate from that focus of, you know what, just be yourself, enjoy it, and learn from it. Because if you do that, that's how you get to where you are. There's plenty of commentators out there well beyond me in the sim racing space, such as Arjun Kankapati. I believe that's his surname. I think he's the lead commentator for RaceSpot TV. He'll say something similar, which is it's all a learning experience, and you have to just keep moving forward as you go.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, that's great. Well, look, it's been phenomenal to have you on the show and to give us your experience of what you've been doing, and really to see that you be able to go from sim racing and then real racing, and I'm sure you will continue to do that. It'd be great to keep up with you, and let us keep in touch with us so that we can find out what you're doing, and we'll put it on our links and on our videos and things, so that people can catch up with you, and maybe see you do some of these big races at the different motorsport circuits around the UK, and you never know, maybe well beyond that. But it's been phenomenal, and thanks to everyone who's been watching tonight, who's been commenting and asking questions. I'm sure it's been inspiring. Please subscribe to Paul's link. It's in the description there, to the YouTube channel, and that will give you some of his races and things that he's doing, and also on Twitter as well. We'll get that all sorted out. But Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for putting your time aside, and you're welcome anytime at all. Maybe when my simulator center is going and it's not maybe too far away, we could get you on and do some commentary. That would be great fun. But stay on the line as we close the show. But thanks to everyone who's watching and listening on the podcast. This week's guest has been Paul Walsh, the commentator extraordinaire. Drive fast, but drive your bus even faster. Bye just now.